It's the Beatles from the beginning to the end. It's their solo careers. It's their humor. It's their incredible music. It's the British invasion. It's their American adversaries. It's an historical musical education. It's the Beatles and a whole lot more. A Beatles fan's paradise. It's BeatlesArama.com. Tune in. You'll love it. Beatlesarama TV is on the air. Yes, it is. And if you want one of these groovy BeatlesArama.com rocks shirts, but then you can go to our website, BeatlesArama.com, and go to the store and order yours today. Hello. I'm Pat Matthews. Welcome to Beatlesarama TV. And today I have some very special guests. I have Lanea Stagg. I said it wrong right off the bat. Lanea Stagg and Jude Southerland Kessler. We tried to do this yesterday and it didn't work. But, you know, since it is election day, we're, the subject matter still is going to work for us. So let me bring in the ladies now. First of all, there's Lanea Stagg.
Harrison.
Are you married?
Yes, I am.
Does your husband
and
know?
I'm not married to George Harrison, nor have I ever been. So,
okay.
Yes.
Well, I just want the audience to know that Pat Matthews didn't type that in, okay? And then we have...
Well, I wanted to make sure everybody knew I was going to be talking about George Harrison.
Okay, well, good. And then, of course, Jude Southerland Kessler won't be talking about George Harrison. She'll be talking about John Lennon. And that's what she's paid to do, right? That's what you're paid to do?
The money is rolling in as we speak.
Yeah. So anyway, listen, ladies, I'm sorry about yesterday. It didn't work out. We tried. And we won't go into the reasons because of it, but it had something to do with Facebook.
Yes.
YouTube wanted to run the show, and so did Twitch. And every time I say Twitch, I laugh. It's like I'm twitching and I'm tweeting. So this is how you get through to us. All right. If you have a question for Jude and or Lanea, go to StreamYard.com/Facebook. And then they're going to ask you is it okay to access your Facebook name and picture? We're not collecting social security numbers here, people. We just want to get your Facebook picture. You know, you do it all the time. Do it for us. Then we'll be able to see your questions. Okay. It's simple. It really is. All right. So Lanea, tell us about this fascination with George Harrison.
Well, I've just always been a George fan. I'm not sure exactly where it all began, but, George was assumed as the quiet Beatle. You could tell by listening to his lyrics that he may have been quiet socially, but he was not quiet in his views and his opinions, and he was very ethereal. He believed in everyone just being a good person, and right. I think that's why I steered toward George.
Okay, so let me ask you this. I mean, you had books about Beatles recipes, right? So you getting away from that
that's
now,
correct.
Or what? Oh, is that Lena's book there?
Yes, it's the original one.
The original.
There's
okay, I've seen the yellow one. In fact,
yes.
Let me do this. Let me show you something. Let me show you the crazy things that I can do. Look at that.
Ooh. Yes,
Fancy,
very
huh?
nice. Very
there's
nice.
your name
Thank
down
you
there. It
for that.
doesn't say Harrison at all. At the bottom.
It does not, does it?
No. So
No,
anyway,
of course not. Of course
So
not.
you-
We're all just being cheeky.
I know. And and we're all drinking early because it's election day.
Yeah. It's going to be a long day, I think. A long night. But
So Jude, tell us a little bit about, first of all, you just did a show, and I wrote the man's name down. Go ahead and tell me Mr. Schreiber. You just did an interview with him, and he has a connection to the Beatles, and it also is a political connection too, right?
Right. Art Schreiber was a reporter, a well-respected reporter for the Westinghouse Network back in the 1960s when Westinghouse was a powerhouse news agency. And he was selected to tour with the Beatles on the 1964 North American tour. But first, he had to complete a prior assignment, which was covering the Democratic National Convention. So he was in Atlantic City covering Lyndon Johnson's acceptance of the nomination from his party. John F. Kennedy had been assassinated on the 22nd of November, 1963. So he'd only been the interim president for about 9 months. And he did not say that he was going to run for president until just about a week before the Democratic National Convention. There have been lots of other people who were running, but days before, he did say that he was going to run. So there was a very contentious Democratic convention in 1964, and Art was on the scene covering it. He also was very close friends with Martin Luther King and had been, as Lanea mentioned to us yesterday, on the Selma March, marching alongside Martin Luther King. He was very much involved in the politics and the big movements of 1964. Then, once the Democratic National Convention ended, he flew to New York City to see the Beatles perform in the Forest Hills Tennis Stadium that very last night that they performed. They did 2 nights in Forest Hills Tennis Stadium. He was there the second night, and then they turned around, and their next stop, of course, was Atlantic City. He said, well, if they told me that, I would have just waited until they arrived in Atlantic City. But he stayed with them on the rest of the tour. So it was tonight, I was primarily talking to him about how contentious the 1964 Democratic National Convention was, because we think we're enduring the most contentious election ever. And it's not true. The Alabama Democratic constituents walked off and left the Democratic National Convention. Mississippi sent 2 groups of delegates who were fighting with each other. So we are not, let not your heart be troubled. We are not in the worst election ever, by far.
I know people have to, get used to reading history, because you can say whatever you want, but if you don't, if you don't do a little bit of research, I mean, you really don't have any right to complain and to come up with those, because it's all just going to be conjecture,
Right.
So,
and Lanea and I are really excited that we get to talk with you about the Beatles and their politics and kind of go from their early days all the way through to the solo years and kind of talk about especially what George and John thought, because we're by no means McCartney experts or Ringo Starr experts. But we do know what George and John were doing. So we'd love to share that. And we thank you for having us on the show, Pat. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Oh, no. Thank you for being here. And thank you for putting up with my nonsense yesterday. We actually, on Beatles-orama today on the radio, we played Ringo for President. So just anyway, I did notice that you look really good now, so that everything seems to be coming together. And now, Lanea, tell us a little bit about your George thing, because what I want to do is we're gonna isolate you, give you some solo screen time, okay?
Okay.
All right, tell us about it.
Okay, so are we gonna just dig right in and start talking about our politics for the Beatles? I can't hear you. So
that's because
are you still
I
there?
had to be on camera. Yes. I had to be on
Okay.
camera. I'm sorry. That was my
Okay.
fault. You know, I'm the producer, director, the switcher, all kind of stuff here. You know what I mean? But let's talk about
I
the
got.
George Harrison. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. All
Well,
right.
as you know, these guys were very young whenever they started playing music, and they probably experienced politics more and in dealing with each other and the political struggles that there were. You know, John and Paul were writing the songs, and George was getting pushed out of the picture. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I did want to mention about a situation that the Beatles were thrown into, not so much just George, but the Beatles as a band when they came to the United States in August of 1964 to play their first American tour. They were faced with a political situation that they had not experienced in the UK. They were playing at stadiums that would not allow segregated audiences that you know had segregated audiences, and the Beatles were just stunned by this. And whenever they were heading to Jacksonville, Florida, to play at the Gator Bowl, the people said, whoever was in charge said that, they would have a segregated audience. And the Beatles said, well, we're not going to play if you are going to do that. And at this time, it was very, very much PC for bands to not talk about politics, not talk about anything controversial. They were instructed by their record companies and their managers, you do not discuss anything controversial. So it was shocking for the Beatles to come out and say, we're not going to play at Jacksonville. Now, John Lennon said, I would sooner lose the money that we were going to get for this show than to play when you are going to treat people like that. And at the time, they were getting $40,000 for that show. In today's money, I looked it up. In today's money, that would be $335,000 they would get for playing that 1 hour show. So it was
not
a
even
lot
hours, 35 minutes.
Yeah.
Right.
So it was a pretty strong statement, and they drew a line in the sand and said, yes, we're not doing that. And so Jacksonville, the Gator Bowl caved in and said, fine, they can, and everybody can sit wherever they want. So whenever the Beatles came back to America the following summer, it was written into their contracts that they would not play to segregated audiences.
And of course, when they came back, for their next go around the United States, I have that soundbite that I wanted that you guys listened to yesterday, that I'm going to play, and then I'm going to have Jude comment on it. It starts off with Paul McCartney being asked about whether American fans still love them, and I think this was like after the John Lennon thing about religion, and so then it led into a controversial subject at the time, which was Vietnam. So I have to take off my headphones for you to hear this. Okay, I know it's kind of squirrely to do it this way, but that's the only way to do it. So here we go.
The Americans still love you? Oh, I think so, yeah. What are you planning to do today? Sleep.
See, we're not, when we say anything like that, we don't say it as older people seem to think to be offensive. we mean it helpfully, and if it's wrong, what we say, okay, it's wrong, and people can say, you're wrong about that one. But in many cases, we believe it's right, we're quite serious about it.
But do you mind being asked questions? For example, in America, people keep asking you questions about Vietnam. Does this seem useful?
Well, I don't know, if you can say that war's not good and a few people believe you, then it may be good, I don't know. You can't say too much, though, that's the trouble.
It seems a bit silly to be in America and for none of them to mention Vietnam as if nothing was happening.
But why should they ask you about it? You're successful.
Yeah, that's that is why they...
Because Americans always ask showbiz people what they think about it. So do the British, Showbiz, you know how it is. But I mean, you've just got to, you can't just keep quiet about anything that's going on in the world unless you're a monk. Sorry, monks, I didn't mean it. I meant actually.
So John had to jump in there and apologize for insulting monks because he didn't want to get in trouble again.
Right, exactly. Brian had, like Lanea said, Brian had really brought the hammer down early on. As early as 61, 62, 63, the Beatles are saying, quite honestly, they don't care about politics. It doesn't matter to them. They're kids, they're young, and they're into girls and their gigs and their gear, and they don't really care. But as they move into 1964, they're becoming rich young men. And someone comes back. It's actually Ray Coleman who wrote the book Lennon. He was a big journalist in Britain at that time. He interviews John and says to him, come on, John, level with me. How do you feel politically? And John is pretty honest with him because he says, well, deep down in my heart, I'm labor. But politics is a state of mind, and you've got to protect your money. So I'm labor in what I believe about desegregation and treating people fairly, and one and all come together. But I also am a little bit more conservative because you've got to protect your money. Well, by 1965, when the Beatles are awarded the MBE, the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, which is a lot more than MBE, it's a lot of other letters, John is the only one who wants to reject the MBE. The others are thrilled about it. They're honored. And John says, I really don't want to. This is selling out. This is, he's starting to move left. He's starting to become a little bit more forward thinking and saying, this is too conservative for me. I really don't want to take it. But Brian convinces him it would be in his best interest to accept it. And the person who really convinced him to accept it was Cynthia. Because she said, John, if you refuse your MBE, so will Paul, so will George, and so will Ringo, and they're excited about it. So for once, you need to think about someone else besides yourself, and you need to say nothing, and you need to accept the MBE. And he did, but you know what happened later on. So the early 60s are very confusing for the boys because they really want to be a little centrist, but in their hearts, they're moving left. So we move into 66, right in the time frame, Pat, that you were just playing for us.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And by now, John is beginning to really swing more left. In fact, he's asked by Disc and Music Echo about his political stance, and this is what he says. I've always wondered about politics and government. I always wondered what was wrong about it. And now that I'm reading some books by Aldous Huxley, which was probably Brave New World. Brave New World was written in the 1930s, but it came into its own in the 1960s. And it's about a totalitarian government that's telling people what to do and when to do it. John's been reading this book. Since I've been reading these books about Aldous Huxley, I've suddenly found out what it's all about. I'm not saying all politicians are terrible men. It's the system of government I don't like. It's been going on for hundreds of years. It'll be hard to change. I'm not an anarchist. I don't want to appear one, but it would be good if more people started realizing the difference between political propaganda and the truth. All these bloody politicians seem the same to me. All they talk about is the economy. Well, what about people and freedom? These things seem to matter more than people seem to worry about them. So as you move into the non-touring studio Beatles who don't have audiences to risk, he's beginning to speak out a little bit more and telling his true political views. And
Mhm.
George, who really was the one that always cared most about the economy of the Beatles and how much money they were earning and how their money is managed, is beginning to voice some opinions about how the Beatles' money's being handled. And Lanea, take it away.
Right. And just so you know, and Lanea, turn my your speaker down a little bit because I can hear myself back through yours. We had a couple of comments now, but they didn't do what we asked them to do. So it just says Facebook user. Okay. Lennon was a born rebel, and someone said John had a chip on his shoulder.
Well, of course.
And then somebody said hi. Yeah, somebody said hi, Pat. So I just.
Yeah, that was Rick Bedrosian. I've met Rick before in New York City on the tour.
Yeah. We play.
Susan's tour.
Rick Bedrosian was one of the first contributors of cover recordings of Beatles songs to Beatles-orama way back in 2001. Okay, so that's how.
He's got some Irish band, by the way.
Yeah, no, it's called Hair of the Dog, right?
Yes, you're right.
Thank you.
Jude and I would be onto Irish bands.
Yeah.
And Rick is right. Ron did have a chip on his shoulder. I mean, he's the first one to admit it. I've got a chip on my shoulder that's bigger than my feet. And why shouldn't he have one? Right. Everything in life was horrible for him. So God bless you, Lennon. And all right, Lanea, tell us about Taxman.
So, as you know, the Beatles were becoming incredibly wealthy young men. And when George was early 60s, George turned 23 years old, and they were very, very wealthy men. And they were finding out that the British government wanted 90% of their earnings. Actually, I've read in some places it got up to 95.5% of their earnings was going to be taken by the government. Mm-hmm. But so in April, George starts writing the lyrics for Taxman, which turned out to be the first track on Revolver. And in many ways, this song was the first song that the band recorded that was a statement and that had a topic. It went just, I love that girl and that girl loves me. And this was the first song that had a topic. And it was a very strong political statement. Very, very strong. So the guys go out there and they put this, first song out on Revolver. And I think that was the catalyst to start the political statements. Now, George says in his biography behind me, I, Me, Mine, that he didn't consider himself a songwriter, like a career songwriter. He felt like those people were very devoted to their craft. And he said that he always used his music and his lyrics as a vehicle to get the feelings out, to express how he felt. And I think that was exactly what he was doing in Taxman, of course. I love the line, there's one for you, 19 for me. So that's definitely hit the mark on that. He also, I also read an interview in the Kansas City Star that it was when the DJs were interviewing the Beatles. And so someone asked them, this was in September of 1964 when they were here on their first American tour. And someone asked them who they were voting for in England. And Paul responded that they didn't know enough about anybody or England to say who they would vote for. And Ringo and Paul both were all over that. But John wittingly said, I'll find out which one takes the least tax. I'll vote for them. What do you think, Jude?
Absolutely. That's, by the way, that interview can be found in Should Have Known Better, Volume 4 in the John Lennon series, which was so.
Who knew?
It is in there. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Wait, let's do this too. Watch. There it is.
There you go.
The JohnLennonSeries.com. Okay,
there you go. That interview is in there. Look, they are beginning, they're not only getting taxed by Britain, but the 1964 North American tour, they were also taxed by the U.S. By the time that Brian paid for the wining and dining of the press, which he did every single night on that tour, and paid the American taxes and paid the British taxes, he went into the hole on the 1964 North American tour, so much so that when they leave to go on the UK tour in 1964, they are eating backstage on the ledge in the dressing room with their face up to the mirror off of, whatever plates, cartons, or whatever. They're not going out to dinner. They're not wining and dining anyone. They're staying in the worst of hotels. One night on the UK tour, they stay in a lovely hotel that's a inn that's run by a family, and they stay in the bedrooms that belong to the family. Otherwise, they're staying in dives because they have lost a ton of money on that North American tour. So, tax man it is. I'm with them. And then, okay, you move to 68, Pat, and John's writing Revolution. And everybody uses this as John Lennon was all for revolution. Well, let's go back and listen to what he had to say. He says, if you want to change the world, here's what you need. Number one, a concrete plan. Don't come to me and say you want chaos. Don't tell me you want to overthrow everyone unless you have a concrete plan. Show me your plan. Number two, no violence. If you go hanging around with people like Chairman Mao, you ain't going to make it with anyone anyhow. I don't want to hear about violence. And you need to, first of all, and primarily, free your mind instead. You want to change the world? You know how to do it? Change yourself. Change your mind. You change and make the world a better place. He's not advocating wholesale violence at all.
No. He said no room for people with minds that hate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. He is not saying, let's go out and burn the town. He's saying, come to me with a plan. Have a change in mind. Let's advocate. Let's go for the plan. We're not going to do wholesale, just throw everything in the air. That's what he was for.
So let me ask you this. If John Lennon would have been around in the summer of 2020, how would he have reacted as a citizen of the United States? Because that's what he got, right? Before he, in the last decade that he was alive, living at the Dakota. So how do you think he would have reacted?
Well, I think he tells us in Give Peace a Chance and Come Together, and in Mind Games, that we are all to work together. We are not to be divided, that if our strength is in our unity, and hating each other and fighting each other and calling each other terrible names on Facebook and saying Republicans are horrible, Democrats are horrible, yeah. I think that would have been the last thing that John Lennon would have wanted. He told us, give peace a chance, come together. We're supposed to be working as a unified group to affect change in the world. And Lanea can tell us more about this, because really George is the one that begins to lead John in this direction as he works with the Maharishi and talks about meditation and talks about the importance of a spirit that is calm, right, Lanea?
That's right. George started in, he became friends with Ravi Shankar, who was a Bengali musician, and he started to teach John a lot about his culture. I'm sorry, George. It's down on the brain. How could I say that? George. And so George started to do some meditation and do some, he went to India and studied with the Maharishi, and he encouraged his bandmates to go along as well. So they did, and there was lots of situations that went on, but George really did study that culture a lot. He was very inquisitive about just where do we come from. He was raised Catholic, but he wanted to know, where are we going to go? And we need to do good deeds before we leave this earthly world. And so he was very much doing that at about this time. And as I mentioned earlier, the politics in the band were really bad by 1968. And George was really getting tired of getting kicked around. And I think later on, Paul and John both agreed that they were hard on George. And so George is writing some songs about this time. And one of the songs that he releases on his first album after the Beatles split up, which was All Things Must Pass, there's a track on there called Beware of Darkness. Of course, the Beatles people are acquainted with it. But I was listening to this song yesterday, and one line caught my ear, and I thought I would say it to you. So he says, "Watch out now, take care, beware of greedy leaders. They'll take you where you should not go. While weeping Atlas cedars, which are beautiful trees, they just want to grow and grow. Beware of darkness." And I thought that was a very transcendent line.
Now let me ask both of you this: have you ever heard the demo version of "Beware of Darkness"?
I think so.
Where and it brings to mind what the Beatles were always all about all the time. They were writing about whatever was going on in their lives at the time. In the demo version, he says, "Beware of ABCO," okay, which was Alan Klein's record company, and he was expressing his displeasure. Now we play that version on Beatles-orama, so everybody wants to hear it. I mean, it's very interesting. A lot of those things, and John, when George was writing the song "Something," and he had the melody in his head and he had some of the lyrics in his head, but he couldn't come up with a line. He says, John says, "Just say, attracts me like cauliflower," which I thought always thought was kind of funny, but so anyway,
that would not be
yeah, it's like that, getting a list of foods and saying which ones you don't eat. You know what I mean? So I gotta know, Lanea, who was knocking on the door there while you were talking?
I don't know, because I've totally blocked everybody out.
Okay,
but
cool.
I'm in a public place. So.
Oh, are you? Okay, no, that's right.
Yes.
That's why it's different from yesterday. Okay.
Well, yes, I was in the same place yesterday, but I was in the restroom yesterday. And I figured out that it was too loud in there. It was a good thing we didn't have the show yesterday.
Oh, you mean like toilets would have been flushing and stuff while you were talking?
Yeah.
Well, listen, this is a very informal program. We just
this is a better alternative out here.
Okay. All right. I hope you're enjoying yourself. What I was going to do right now is I have one more clip. I couldn't find the clip about Brian Epstein, but what I did find was during the bed-in for peace, where John was talking about borders and that kind of stuff. And I thought maybe it might be appropriate. So let's listen to that one. Okay. Let me play it.
There was a time, when you didn't have to have a passport to go from country to country. What kind of world are we creating? Really, it used to be you could go around, What is this game that you can't get, that somehow this is America and then just across the field is Canada, and that you have to have all kinds of papers and pictures and stamps and passports, and the concept of imagining no countries, imagining no religion, not imagining no God although you're entitled to do that too. Imagining no denominations. Imagining that we revere Jesus Christ, Mohammed, Krishna equally. We don't have to worship either one, that we don't have to. But imagine there's no Catholic Protestant, no Jew Christian, that we allow it all, freedom of religion for real. I mean, for real.
But there you go. So I think that was like late January 69 or 70. No, 69,
Yeah.
right? No.
And then, well, because he's already had the bed-ins, but he's definitely moving at this point into who he's going to be during the 1970s. He's going to be a peace activist. He's going to be constantly moving toward Jerry Rubin and the SDS and the underground, who all meet him in New York when he lands there. They all want his celebrity status to be lent to their different causes. But he was interviewed in the summer of 1971 by a man named Peter McCabe and Robert Schoenfeld. And this is what John says to them. They said to him that, what are you going to do with your life now that you've divorced the Beatles and you're out on your own? And he says, well, he wants to go on tour, not because he wants to play music or make money, but because he wants to do something political. And they say to him, well, what do you mean do something political? What do you mean exactly? And he says, well, I mean political, because everything I do is political. And that really sums up the early part of the 1970s for John. Not from 75 until 79, he's in what he called the house husband phase, which isn't house husband at all, because he's busy writing music and being very creative and traveling and doing a lot of other things. But 70 to 75, he is extremely political. And one of my favorite things that he did during that time is in 1972, February of 1972, he is released sometime in New York City, in which he speaks out against the English occupation of Ireland and speaks for a free Ireland. And he does Luck of the Irish, and he also does Sunday Bloody Sunday to stand up for all of the people who were killed during the Bloody Sunday massacre. And in 1972, he and Jerry Rubin march on BOAC in New York City. They lead 5,000 people, 5,000 Irish, through the streets of New York City up to the door of BOAC, protesting English presence in Ireland. And because of that, John was banned from the BBC. They wouldn't play his records anymore. But he did not care, because politics to him at that point meant standing up for what you believe in. Now, did it mean violence? No. They didn't throw any bricks at BOAC. They didn't burn down BOAC. They marched peacefully and they marched powerfully. And their peaceful protest was very peaceful and very powerful. And it made a difference. It so scared the BBC that they no longer would play his songs. And of course, that during the 70s, he also returns his MBE because England is supporting America in the Vietnam War, and he wants the Vietnam War to end. And also because of the Biafra conflict, which England is involved in. So John is moving much more towards the left. Now, I don't know, I'm not aware of what was going on with George at that time, Lanea, at all. So was he also, I know was he doing the concert for Bangladesh at that time?
I think so.
Yes, actually in, and this is very, very much George. And this is why I've always just been drawn to him. He, in July, I think, of 1971, his friend Ravi Shankar came to him and said, there's this crisis in my country of Bangladesh. And Bangladesh had just broken away from East Pakistan, I guess. And so there was a war. The area had a cyclone within the year, and there were millions of people dying of famine and disease. And it was horrible. And Ravi Shankar was telling George about it. And Ravi says, I know that you can't do anything, George, but I just want you to know. And George said, well, I'm glad you told me, because I think I can help and I want to help. And so they talked about George doing a concert and raising $25,000 to give to the country. And it turned out to be a very big event. This is the first time a musician holds a big show for benefit, and it's a political benefit. And there were people in the country that were being massacred by the government. There was a lot, and the Americans were just turning a blind eye to it. England was turning a blind eye to it. And George called them out in his song Bangladesh and said, there's people suffering. How can you not help them? Why are you turning away? You are not paying attention to what is happening. And so the song was released on a 45, and it raised a bunch of money. Then they did 2 shows at Madison Square Garden in New York, and it was recorded, and they released it on an album, which won a Grammy, and they released it in film. And I guess the cheeky part that kind of drove George crazy is the people in charge did not approve it with UNICEF before and say, we're going to have a concert for you and give you this money. And the money got held up for years before it actually got there. And it was millions of dollars. And so those kinds of things drove George bananas and made him very suspicious of anyone in a suit. And rightfully so.
Yeah, no, I agree. So anyway, hey, so listen, guys, I'm going to have to wrap up the show here. Is there something that we didn't cover? Let me know.
The only thing I think that all 3 of us would like to say, I'm speaking to you, Pat, is that, look, we have talked about political conflict from 1964 through 66, through 67, through 68, through the 70s. Nothing has changed. We are experiencing conflict right now, but they experienced it in 64 when Art Schreiber was talking to me earlier today about the candidates from Alabama and Mississippi leaving the Democratic Convention and refusing to take part. We talked about it with the tax situation with the Beatles and speaking out and the segregation issues. There has always been conflict, but our strength is in our unity. And we can't let whatever happens tonight or in the next week or in the next 2 weeks or whatever change who we are. We all still need to come together. And this isn't the end of the world. I'm sure if you would have said to the people back in the 64 Democratic National Convention, because Bobby Kennedy very much wanted to be Lyndon Johnson's running mate, and Lyndon Johnson found a clever way to stop him from doing that. He said, no one on my cabinet can be my running mate. That was a scandal back then. But you know what? How many people know it now? Very few people. This too shall pass.
Right. You got something, parting words, Lanea?
Well, I just want to say kudos to Jude on everything that she said. She's absolutely right. And, regardless of what political opinion or view we have, everybody's got their own, and it comes from how they were raised or what experiences they've had in their lives. And regardless of that, we're all humans, all suffer, and we all, have feelings, and we just have to get along and be peaceful.
Right. And you know what? It's not that we're just all humans, or we're all Americans. We're also all Beatles fans, and they were all about peace and love. And Ringo Starr just drives that home every chance he gets. And and I think that people should pick up on it. It's not something that's old-fashioned or anything like that. It's something that's needed today and every day.
Right.
So ladies, I want to thank you all so much. Don't go anywhere. I want to talk to you off the air. Okay. All right. But thanks again for coming on. And Let me ask you this, Lena. Do you have to mop the floors in that restroom before you leave, or what?
I should, but I'm not.
All right, everybody. That's Lena Stagg and Jude Southerland Kessler, both great ladies, and they know their stuff about the Beatles, and it was a pleasure having them on today. This Friday at 2 o'clock Pacific, 5 o'clock Eastern, we're going to have a lady on, a young woman who is like a crazed Paul McCartney fanatic, and she's been to some hundreds of McCartney concerts. She sold her car so that she could go to shows. I mean, it's wild. And then she also had her foot autographed by McCartney on stage, and then she had a tattoo done. So we're going to talk to Emily Morenz on Friday at 2 o'clock Pacific. Until then, I'm Pat Matthews. Thanking you for watching, and stay safe, okay?